My name is Margaret Ellison. I am 62 years old, a widow, and I work part-time at the circulation desk of our public library. Most evenings I return to a basement room I rent beneath another family's house. The ceiling hangs low, and in winter the pipes hiss like restless snakes. Still, it is quiet enough for me to sit with a book before bed. That is my life, plain, modest, nearly invisible. But on Christmas night, beneath chandeliers brighter than morning, my son Daniel raised a glass. Daniel, my only child, a man who now moves with confidence in Dallas business circles, wore a tuxedo tailored so sharply it seemed meant only for him. He smiled the smile of someone who believed the entire room was his stage. And then, with a voice that cut through the music and chatter, he declared, "I just bought my mother a $2 million house." Applause erupted like fireworks. Cameras flashed. Guests gasped in admiration, their eyes darting toward me as though I had suddenly been crowned. I stood at the far edge of the ballroom in a thrift store dress that tugged at its seams, the neckline sagging, my hands clasped together so no one would see them tremble. $2 million. That was his claim. The truth was different. The truth was that on the first of every month, I slid an envelope of rent beneath the door for a basement apartment with mildew woven into the carpet. The truth was I boiled water in a dented kettle and left my winter coat draped over a chair because the room never truly warmed. The truth was that while the guests lifted their glasses to Daniel's generosity, I felt myself shrinking into a lie wrapped in sequins. They believed I was the lucky mother. What they celebrated was nothing more than theater. An invention meant to impress investors, colleagues, strangers. A performance, not a gift. Daniel's arms swept across the air, inviting more applause. His wife, Victoria, stood behind him, her expression carved into a smile that cut like glass. It wasn't warmth or pride. It was victory. The kind of smile that dares you to challenge it, that bets on your silence. But silence can grow heavy. And that night, with the chandeliers burning above me and the floor alive with music, something sharp and unmovable took root inside me. At that Christmas gala, my son boasted to the world that he had given me a $2 million house. Yet I still paid rent for a basement apartment. And when I stood up and told the truth, Victoria's smile shattered. That was the beginning. Before I tell you what followed, the questions, the evidence, the paper trail that changed everything, I want to ask you something. Have you ever watched someone use your name to build their own story? A story you knew was false. And have you ever stayed silent so long that the silence itself began to wound you? Because this is not just about money. It is about dignity. About how far a mother will go to defend the truth when her own child risks it for ambition. So stay with me. Because the night Daniel raised his glass was only the surface. The real story lay beneath, as hidden as the room where I laid my head each night. If this story already stirs something in you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss what comes next. And please tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We're building a community that understands stories like mine. When the gala ended, I did not linger for photographs or champagne toasts. I slipped my coat over the faded dress and stepped into the cold night. The valet did not wait for me. No car of mine circled around. I walked 3 blocks to where my old Ford sat beneath a crooked streetlight. The ride back to Pine Street was quiet but for the rattle of the heater that no longer worked. My breath fogged the windshield and I cleared a circle with my sleeve. I drove home the way I had learned to live. Slow, steady, unnoticed. The house on Pine Street isn't mine. It belongs to a family upstairs, a couple with 2 small children. They rent me the basement. I let myself in through the side door, careful not to wake anyone. The light bulb above the stairwell flickered, buzzing like a tired insect. At the bottom, I unlocked my door and stepped inside. The room welcomed me with its familiar hush, the low ceiling pressing close, the chipped paint catching faint shadows. The carpet carried a damp smell no matter how many times I scrubbed it. The radiator clicked, but it rarely warmed. A single lamp with its yellowed shades softened the corners. I set my purse on the chair where I also hung my coat, since there was no closet to claim. The room was simple, pared down to what I needed. A narrow bed, a second-hand dresser, one shelf with books stacked sideways. In the corner sat the small stove I used to boil water, and on it rested the one thing that had followed me through decades: my old tea kettle. The handle was worn smooth, the enamel chipped in places. I bought it when I was first married, and somehow, despite moves and storms and years of use, it had survived. Each night I filled it, set it on the flame, and waited for the whistle that signaled the day had ended and I was still here. That night was no different. I made tea, held the warm cup between both hands, and sat at the small table pushed against the wall. Above me, the ceiling carried the muffled life of the family upstairs. Laughter, the squeak of pipes, the slam of a cabinet door. Ordinary sounds that reminded me I lived below someone else's world. The quiet let memories return. My husband, Robert, had been gone for 12 years. He died too young, leaving me with Daniel and the heavy arithmetic of bills. Robert was steady, a mechanic who never made much money but never stopped working. His hands were always stained, yet always gentle when they touched my face. He once promised me the hard years would pass, that Daniel would grow and give me comfort in my later days. I believed him. I thought of our first apartment where I patched curtains by hand, where Robert brought home a second-hand kettle, the same one that now sat on my stove. We raised Daniel on meals stretched with beans and rice. I took house-cleaning shifts so he could play soccer, so he could wear shoes that wouldn't make other boys laugh. I whispered to myself that sacrifice was temporary, that love was permanent. But love changes. Or perhaps people do. Daniel grew ambitious, sharper than his father, hungry for more. I encouraged it even when it pulled him further away from me. When Robert died, I tried to stand taller so Daniel would not see me bend. I paid tuition with money I did not have. I worked nights at the grocery store, mornings at the library. My hands grew calloused from scrubbing shelves, from bleach, from steel wool. Even now the skin remembers. At the library, my shifts are filled with reshelving books, scanning barcodes, repairing torn covers with tape. Children run in, dropping backpacks by the tables. Teenagers whisper too loudly between stacks. Retirees sit with their newspapers until closing. Most barely glance at the woman behind the counter. That suits me. To be invisible is to be safe. Yet sometimes when I hand a child their first library card, I feel a spark. I remember why I stayed, why I worked, why I sacrificed. Because knowledge mattered, because opportunity mattered. Still, no one at the library knows that my son stands in banquet halls and tells strangers he gave me a mansion. They don't know that I return each night to a basement that hums with pipes. They don't know my tea kettle is the only witness left to the promises I once believed. I rinsed the cup and set it carefully on the counter. The kettle was still warm. I touched the dent along its side with my thumb. The same dent from the day Robert dropped it while moving us into our second apartment. A memory of laughter came back to me. Daniel, small and proud, pretending to carry boxes heavier than his body. We had so little then, and yet I thought we had everything. That night on Pine Street, I lay down on the narrow bed, folding my coat over my legs for warmth. Above me, the family stirred. The father's footsteps pacing, the children giggling before sleep. My eyes traced the cracks in the ceiling. And in the dark, I heard Daniel's voice echo under chandeliers. I just bought my mother a $2 million house. I heard the applause, the cameras, and saw Victoria's smile all over again. Then I opened my notebook and wrote the truth in plain ink. Rent, Pine Street, $700 a month. The kettle gave a low whistle, though no flame touched it. Or perhaps it was only the pipes sighing. Either way, I understood. Tomorrow would come and I would keep moving. Daniel called the morning after New Year's and suggested lunch. He chose a glass-walled restaurant uptown, the kind with valet parking and waiters who glided more than walked. I put on my best blouse and a cardigan missing one button. The bus dropped me a block away and I walked past displays of handbags I could never afford. Inside, everything shimmered. Mirrors, wine glasses, Daniel's cufflinks catching the light. He stood when he saw me, tall, polished, a watch flashing at his wrist. "Mom," he said, brushing a kiss against the air near my cheek. "You look wonderful." I sat, holding the menu as though I belonged in that room. Daniel began before I could speak, as if the speech had been waiting inside him. "I want to talk about the trust," he said, his voice carrying that practiced rhythm he used at galas, the voice of a man who planned futures. "The house isn't just about comfort. It's about long-term security. I've set up structures, tax-efficient vehicles, consolidation strategies. This ensures you'll be cared for the rest of your life." I stirred the water glass in front of me, watching ice drift. His words fell like bricks, stacked, heavy, impressive, but none of them resembled my reality. Trust. Vehicle. Structure. Long-term. They floated like banners, while not once did he mention the rent I paid each month, the kettle whistling in my basement kitchen, or the sweater I had mended 3 times already. He leaned back with a smile. "It's not necessary for you to understand every detail. What matters is you're safe. Everyone thinks of you as the matriarch now. People admire you. That's important, isn't it?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Silence pressed against me, heavier than his words. I folded the napkin in my lap, corner to corner, until it made a sharp triangle. Victoria arrived just then, sweeping in with her coat trimmed in fur. She kissed Daniel's cheek and slid into the seat beside him. "Mother Margaret," she said brightly. "I hope Daniel explained everything. You don't need to worry about the paperwork or the technical side. All you should do is enjoy. Think of it like a gift you've already unwrapped." Her smile gleamed, as polished as if a camera were waiting. I nodded once. My silence was not agreement. It was memory. I wanted to remember the way she said enjoy, like a command, not an invitation. The waiter placed salmon and greens before us. Daniel spoke of expansion plans, of partnerships, of legacy. Victoria nodded at every word. I chewed slowly, tasting little. My mind drifted to nights when Daniel was a boy and I packed sandwiches in wax paper, praying he wouldn't notice I skipped my own lunch to save money for his soccer trip. The past and present overlapped like 2 films playing at once. The sacrifices I made, the glittering lies unfolding now. Daniel tapped his glass for emphasis. "This is about optics, Mom. People need to see that I take care of you. That's how deals are made. Image matters as much as truth." I set my fork down. "Image," he said, as if it could buy heat in winter, as if it could scrub mildew from carpet. My silence lengthened. Victoria reached across the table, patting my hand lightly. "Don't trouble yourself with the numbers," she said. "Daniel knows exactly what he's doing. You raised him well. Let him handle the future. All you have to do is smile and accept." I pulled my hand back gently. In my mind, the words formed clear as a bell. My silence is not agreement. My silence is to remember. Lunch ended with Daniel sliding his card across the table, quick as a magician's trick. He kissed my cheek again and said, "Trust me, Mom. Everything is handled." I walked out into the January air, sharper than before, the sun bouncing off glass towers. The city moved around me, cars honking, phones buzzing, people laughing. I carried no shopping bags, no promises of mansions. Only the truth folded neat inside me like the napkin I had left behind. And I carried silence, heavy but sharp. Silence that kept score. Silence that would not vanish. It happened on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. I had stopped at the small grocery store on Pine Street, the one with shelves that leaned a little and fluorescent lights that hummed like tired bees. I was comparing soup cans when I heard a voice behind me. Margaret. Margaret Ellison. I turned and there stood Martin, Robert's closest friend. The man who had spent weekends in our garage, talking cars with my husband while Daniel rode his bike in endless circles around them. Martin looked older now, his hair gone silver, his shoulders bent, but his eyes were unchanged, warm, curious, searching. He hugged me briefly, then stepped back with a smile. "I saw Daniel at that gala in December," he said. "Quite the spectacle. And that announcement, a $2 million house for you. Congratulations. Tell me, how's the new place?" The can of soup slipped from my hand and hit the shelf with a dull clang. Heat rushed into my face. Words tangled in my throat. For a moment I thought about smiling, playing along, giving him the story everyone else believed. But my mouth betrayed me. "Basement room," I said softly. "Pine Street. $700 a month." The smile vanished from his face. His eyes searched mine, hoping for a hint of a joke. "Margaret," he whispered. "Are you serious?" I nodded once. No explanations, no excuses. Just truth dropped heavy between us like that can of soup. Martin shook his head slowly. "Robert would never." He stopped, biting the inside of his cheek. "I don't understand. Everyone believes you're taken care of." I forced a faint smile though my chest ached. "Everyone believes what they're told." He stared at me, and in his eyes I saw the reflection of my own humiliation. His silence carried sorrow, the kind a friend wears when he cannot fix what he sees. In that silence I felt the full weight of what Daniel had done. Not only to me but to my name. He had turned me into a story, a prop for his image while I still counted coins for rent. I excused myself, placing the soup can back on the shelf. My hands trembled as I walked to the register. Martin followed partway as if wanting to say more, then stopped. His face lingered in my mind as I left, carrying groceries that felt heavier than usual. Back in my basement room I put the bags away in the narrow cabinet. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. I set the old kettle on the burner and soon it rattled and whistled the way it always had. When I poured the tea, the steam rose and blurred the edges of the room. I sat at the table staring into the cup. My reflection trembled in the liquid, broken by ripples. Martin's voice replayed in my head. "Quite the spectacle. A $2 million house for you." Then my own reply, plain and small. "Basement room. $700 a month." The contrast was unbearable. I had swallowed lies before, endured them quietly. But this was different. Now someone outside the family knew. His shock confirmed what I already feared, that the lie was larger than me and growing. Daniel had painted me into a portrait that did not exist, and people believed it because I had not spoken. I pushed the tea aside and opened the drawer of the small desk against the wall. Inside was a blank notebook I had bought months earlier on clearance, never used. I placed it on the table, smoothed the cover with my hand and uncapped a pen. The first page stared back at me, pure and waiting. I wrote slowly, each letter deliberate. Basement, Pine Street. Rent $700. The ink bled slightly into the paper, but it was firm, undeniable. My hand trembled, yet my heart steadied. This was not agreement. This was record. From this night forward I would write everything. Every rent slip, every bill, every word Daniel spoke about trusts and houses. I would not argue. I would not shout. I would collect. The kettle clicked as it cooled, a small sound in the silence. I looked at it, chipped, dented, yet still holding water. It had endured as I had. I whispered into the empty room. Impressions fade. Paper remains. Then I closed the notebook and set it beside the cup of tea. The beginning had been written. The first step was simple. I pulled the drawer open and gathered the slips I had stuffed inside over the months. Rent receipts, each stamped with the landlord's name and the number 700 written in black ink. Some were creased, others smudged from being folded into my purse. I laid them across the table in a neat line, month after month, stretching back like a quiet testimony. Next came the utility bills. I reached into a shoebox under my bed where I had kept old envelopes, the ones I usually saved in case I needed scrap paper. Electricity, water, gas. All addressed to me at Pine Street, all showing payments made from my account. I flattened them one by one, the numbers glowing under the lamp. Small amounts by city standards, but heavy for a woman working 2 jobs. Finally, I logged into the library computer during my lunch break and printed out the most recent bank statements. Each line was a record of my life. Rent withdrawn, grocery purchases, bus fares, modest deposits from my shifts. No trace of a trust fund, no evidence of the $2 million house Daniel had announced. Just survival repeated monthly. I stacked the papers together and pressed the edges straight. The pile was thin, but to me it felt solid, a kind of armor. That weekend Martin visited. He carried a folder under his arm, worn at the corners, filled with forms from his volunteer work. He sat at my small table, sipping tea from a chipped mug, and looked at the evidence spread before us. "Margaret," he said softly, "this is good. Paper doesn't lie. People lie. Applause lies. But numbers on a page, they don't change. Keep every receipt, every notice. If he's claiming he supports you, these papers prove otherwise." I nodded. His words sank deep, heavier than they sounded. Paper doesn't lie. I repeated it to myself like a prayer. We sorted the documents into sections. Rent, utilities, bank. Martin showed me how to clip them with rubber bands, how to note dates in the margins so nothing could be dismissed as vague memory. "Detail matters," he reminded me. "The more precise you are, the stronger your voice becomes, even without speaking loud." That night, after Martin left, I sat again with the kettle. The steam fogged my glasses and I set them aside, watching the blur clear slowly. In that blur I saw myself at the gala, cornered by applause, silenced by glitter. But now, with papers spread across my table, I felt something shift. It wasn't anger that rose in me. Anger burns out quickly. This was steadiness, a calm I hadn't known since Robert died. The sense that I could build something brick by brick, even if each brick was only a folded bill or a stamped receipt. I remembered Daniel's voice at lunch saying, "Image matters more than truth." I let those words echo, then fade. My answer sat right in front of me. Truth written in ink, stamped, signed. I wrote in my notebook again. Collected rent slips, utilities, bank statements. Paper will hold when memory falters. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. I realized then that silence itself could be power. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of preparation. Each time Daniel bragged, I would not argue. I would record. Each time Victoria smiled that sharp smile, I would not protest. I would keep the date, the place, the words. One day all of it would be lined up like these bills, undeniable. I poured another cup of tea, the handle warm against my hand. My back ached from leaning over the table, but I straightened, feeling taller than I had in weeks. There was no mansion waiting for me, no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no $2 million house. But there was a record now, a truth no chandelier could drown out. I thought of Robert, his grease-stained fingers flipping through manuals in the garage. He used to say, "Engines. Either they run or they don't." I smiled faintly. Paper was the same way. Either it proved something or it didn't. And mine proved everything Daniel had denied. When I finally lay down to sleep, I kept the folder of documents on the chair beside my bed, within reach. My hand rested on the cover as if it were a shield. For the first time in a long while, the basement didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a place where something had begun. And as the pipes hissed above me, I whispered to myself, I don't need to shout. The pages will speak louder than I ever could. The phone rang late on a Tuesday evening. I had just finished sorting through another stack of bills, sliding them into my notebook when the sound cut through the quiet. The screen lit up with Daniel's name. I watched it blink. My thumb hovered. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. I let it run 1 beat longer before I pressed accept. That pause was not an accident. It was a choice. Mom, Daniel said, his voice smooth, rehearsed. I want to make sure you're not worried. I know there's been some talk since the gala. People ask questions, but you don't have to let any of it trouble you. I stayed silent, waiting. My pen rested on the open page of the notebook. He continued, steady as if giving a presentation. It's all in a trust. Everything is structured carefully. Long-term planning, consolidation, the kind of things most people don't understand. What matters is that you're taken care of. You don't need to get lost in the details. I wrote down each word as he spoke. Trust. Structure. Long-term. Don't understand. Taken care of. The phrases looked smaller on paper than they sounded through the phone. Finally, I answered, my voice calm. A trust. And where is that written, Daniel? There was the faintest pause before he replied. It's not something you need to see. It's all handled legally, documented properly. You just have to believe me. The kettle clicked softly behind me, though I had not turned on the stove. I pressed the pen harder. Believe you. I repeated. While I keep paying rent for the basement? He chuckled lightly, the way people do when they want to sweep discomfort away. Mom, you're being too literal. Image is part of the business. People expect to hear a certain story. They invest in that story. The house is symbolic. Symbolic. I wrote that too. My silence stretched again. I could hear him breathing, faint and uneven now. Mom, he asked after a moment. Are you there? Yes, I said simply. Nothing more. The quiet unsettled him. He filled it quickly. Listen, I'm doing this for you. One day when the time is right, you'll see how it all connects. The trust will give you more security than rent receipts ever could. Don't get distracted by numbers on paper. Numbers on paper. I underlined the phrase twice in my notebook. My lips curved, not in humor but in recognition of the truth he had just revealed. Numbers on paper frightened him because numbers on paper are real. I let another silence sit between us long enough that he had to say my name again. Mom, do you understand what I'm saying? I understand perfectly, I answered. My tone was flat, steady. Not angry, not pleading, just firm like a door closing quietly. Daniel exhaled, relief in the sound. Good. I knew you'd trust me. We'll talk again soon. The line clicked dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, then at the words I had written. Trust. Structure. Symbolic. Numbers on paper. Each phrase was a brick he thought would build a wall around the truth. Instead, they were stones I would lay carefully in my own foundation. I closed the notebook and placed it beside the cooling kettle. For the first time, I felt the balance shift, not in loud declarations, not in a fight across a dinner table, but in the simple act of holding silence long enough for his words to betray themselves. That night, I slept with the phone on the table beside me, my notebook under my hand. Power did not come from shouting or proving myself in his eyes. It came from patience, from writing down every word. Impatience had always belonged to Daniel. Silence now belonged to me. Martin came by one Saturday morning with someone new at his side. I had just set the kettle on the stove when they knocked. When I opened the door, Martin smiled in that careful way of his, as if he carried both good news and heavy news at once. Beside him stood a woman I had never met. Margaret, Martin said. This is Patricia. She's an attorney. We volunteered together at the community center. Patricia extended her hand. Her grip was firm, her eyes steady behind simple glasses. She wore a navy coat and carried a leather folder pressed tight under her arm. Not flashy, not soft. She looked like someone who dealt in clarity. We sat around my small table. The kettle whistled and I poured tea into 3 mismatched cups. Martin nodded toward the notebook that sat open, filled with my careful handwriting, receipts clipped inside. She's been keeping records, he told Patricia. Every bill, every word. I thought she should talk to you. Patricia opened her folder and drew out a legal pad. She listened as I explained about Daniel's announcement at the gala, about his insistence on a trust one had never seen, about the basement rent, about the silences I carried. I spoke slowly, not to convince but to document. Her pen scratched notes across the yellow paper. When I finished, she looked up. Margaret, if your son is claiming he supports you financially, and if he receives benefits, tax breaks, image capital, anything tangible while you actually provide for yourself, that could constitute fraud. She paused, letting the word rest between us. And because you are over 60, it may also fall under elder abuse. The law does not take that lightly. The words settled in me like stones sinking into water. Fraud. Abuse. They were not words I had ever used for my own life, but hearing them from her mouth made the shape of my situation undeniable. Patricia leaned forward. Here is what you need to do. Continue what you have already started. Keep writing. Keep every slip, every bill, every message. Do not confront him in a way that gives him time to destroy documents. The truth grows strongest when it is patient. Her voice was even, not dramatic, not meant to frighten me, just steady like the sound of a door clicking shut against the wind. I wrapped my hands around my cup. So I am not imagining it. It isn't just my pride. She shook her head. It is not pride. It is law. You have rights, Margaret. They don't disappear because someone speaks louder than you. Something loosened in my chest. For weeks I had lived with the sense that I carried this burden alone, that my silence was nothing more than weakness. Now across my table sat proof that silence could also be strategy. Patricia did not ask me to shout. She asked me to endure, to record, to trust that paper and time would do the work. Martin placed his hand briefly over mine. You're not alone anymore, he said. I looked at the folder on the table, the yellow pad filling with Patricia's notes, the stack of receipts beside my notebook. For the first time, the basement did not feel like a cage. Felt like headquarters. Patricia sipped her tea, then added one more sentence, soft but certain. Truth is like water, Margaret. Takes the shape of whatever holds it. But it cannot be destroyed. It only waits. That evening after they left, I sat with my notebook again. I wrote at the top of a new page. Patricia says, keep writing. Keep holding. The truth needs time. I placed the pen down and touched the kettle's handle. It was still warm and so was I. It was a Friday evening when I found myself at another gathering. Not a gala this time, but a smaller dinner at a colleague's house, one of Daniel's business partners who insisted I come. I wore the same cardigan I always wore to the library, the one with the missing button. The room was warm, filled with laughter, glasses clinking, and plates of food too rich for my stomach. Daniel moved easily through the crowd, Victoria beside him like a shadow in silk. They were practiced, polished, their smiles synchronized, their words rehearsed. I stayed near the corner of the dining room, sipping water from a stemmed glass I didn't feel entitled to hold. Halfway through the evening, one of Daniel's colleagues, a man with a wide tie and too much cologne, approached me. He beamed as if he were about to pay me a compliment. Mrs. Ellison, he said loudly enough for several others to hear. I have to say your son is remarkable. That house he bought you, 2 million, right? Extraordinary. Tell me, where is it? I'd love to see the place sometime. The room fell quiet just for a beat. Forks paused. Eyes tilted my way. Victoria's smile froze, still painted on her face but stiff at the edges. Daniel cleared his throat. I set my glass down carefully on the table. My voice came out steady, low, without decoration. Basement, I said. Pine Street. 700 a month. The silence stretched. You could almost hear the chandelier buzzing overhead. The man blinked, his smile faltering. I must have misunderstood. No, I said, still calm. You heard right. Daniel told you about a house, but I rent a basement apartment. I pay 700 every month. That is the address you're asking for. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The truth sat heavy in the air, heavier than wine or applause. Daniel gave a quick laugh. Too sharp. Too fast. Mom's just being modest, he said, his hand flicking as if to wave away my words. She doesn't like attention. You know how mothers are. But no one laughed with him. Victoria's smile remained, but the triumph had drained out. Her eyes darted toward mine, searching for weakness. She found none. I picked up my glass again and took a sip. My hand was steady. Conversations resumed slowly, but not the same as before. People whispered instead of praising. They glanced at me, then at Daniel, then back again. The story had cracked. Not shattered, not yet, but the first visible line had appeared, and everyone in that room had seen it. I stayed only a little while longer, long enough to finish my plate and thank the host. Victoria avoided my eyes as I left. Daniel kissed my cheek at the door, his jaw tight. We'll talk later, he muttered. Outside, the night air felt cleaner than it had in weeks. I walked down the steps and into the street, the cool wind filling my lungs. For the first time, I understood what Patricia had meant when she told me to keep holding. The truth didn't need a spotlight. It only needed patience in the right moment. That moment had come unplanned, in the form of a casual question. And with one simple answer, the performance had begun to unravel. As I rode the bus back to Pine Street, I thought of my notebook waiting on the table. Tonight I would write again. Public dinner. Colleague asked about the house. Answer: basement. Pine Street. 700 a month. Witnesses present. The page would hold the weight of what had happened. And tomorrow the lie would weigh heavier on Daniel than it did on me. It did not take long for the whispers to grow. By Monday morning, Daniel's colleagues were already circling the story like birds over open water. What I had said at the dinner table spread in pieces. Margaret doesn't live in a mansion. Margaret rents a basement. 700 a month. Each person repeated it differently, but the meaning stayed intact. At the library that week, I overheard two women talking in hushed tones near the magazines. One said, "Can you believe it? He said he bought her a $2 million home." The other replied, "Strange, isn't it, that she still lives on Pine Street? My cousin swears she's seen her carrying groceries there." They didn't know I was shelving books 2 aisles away. Their voices stung, but I kept my back straight. The truth was out. Whether whispered or shouted, it no longer belonged to Daniel alone. By Wednesday, Daniel called. His name flashed across my phone again. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, then answered. His tone was sharper this time. "Mom, what are you doing? Do you realize the mess you've made? People are asking questions. Investors are doubting me. You're making me look bad." I sat at my table, notebook open, pen ready. "Look bad," I repeated slowly, writing the words down. "Yes," he snapped. "Do you understand how important perception is in business? It's not just about the numbers. It's about reputation. And you're tearing mine apart." I let the silence hang until he had no choice but to breathe into it. Then I answered, calm and steady. "Daniel, you're worried about losing face. I'm worried about losing myself." There it was. The line that had been forming inside me for weeks. You worry about face. I worry about self. The difference between pride and dignity, between image and truth. He sputtered as if I had struck something raw. Mom, you don't get it. This is bigger than you. We're talking about deals, about growth, about a future. If you keep undermining me, you're not just hurting me, you're hurting yourself. Don't you see that? I traced the rim of my teacup with one finger. What I see, I said quietly, is that I still live in a basement. I still pay $700 a month. And what you told the world was a lie. His breath hissed through the line. Why can't you just play along? Nobody needs to know the details. It's only an image. It's harmless. Harmless. I underlined it twice in my notebook. My voice did not rise. A lie is not harmless when it uses my name, Daniel. It is not harmless when it erases my life. Every dollar I spend, every shift I work, every night I lie awake in that room, those are not harmless. They are mine. And you took them from me when you stood under those lights. For a long moment he said nothing. I imagined him pacing, running a hand through his perfect hair, searching for words that would soften the truth. But there was nothing soft left to give him. Finally he muttered, "You don't understand how the world works." "I understand how my world works," I replied. "And it runs on rent slips, grocery bills, and a kettle that whistles when the water boils. Not on image. Not on illusions." The silence between us widened again. He broke it at last, voice lower. "You're going to regret this." "No," I said steady. "One day you will." I ended the call before he could answer. My hand shook slightly as I placed the phone down, but my heart beat strong. I looked at the page in my notebook, the words circled in ink. "You worry about face. I worry about self." The kettle clicked behind me as if agreeing. I poured the hot water into my cup and sat back, letting the steam rise around me. The whispers outside would continue. Daniel would scramble to patch the cracks. Victoria would force her smile tighter. But I had spoken the truth in public, and now I had spoken it to him. The reckoning had begun. That night stretched longer than most. I could not fall asleep, so I lay still in my narrow bed, the ceiling above me dimly lit by the glow of the streetlight seeping through the small window. The pipes clicked and moaned, carrying the sound of other people's lives above me. My notebook rested open on the chair, pen across its spine. My mind drifted backward, unwillingly at first, then with a kind of ache. I saw Daniel as a boy again, 7 years old, running barefoot across the patchy grass in our old yard. His laughter rang high and free, the kind that lifts a mother's heart without effort. Robert had been alive then, tossing a ball underhand while Daniel chased it like a wild thing, hair sticking to his forehead with sweat. I remembered standing at the back door, dish towel in my hands, thinking that no matter how poor we were rich in that moment. I closed my eyes and let the sound of his laughter echo against the silence of the basement. For a second I almost forgot the man he had become. The tuxedo, the speeches, the lies. I almost let myself believe I could walk outside and find that little boy again. But memories can be cruel. They show you what was, not what is. The kettle whistled softly. I must have left a bit of water inside from earlier. I set it back on the stove and sat at the table, the notebook waiting. I flipped to a blank page and wrote the question that burned inside me. If I forgive, I lose my dignity. If I expose, I lose my son. Which loss is greater? The words stared at me, sharp and honest. It was the conflict that tied my chest in knots. A mother is taught to forgive, to protect, to cover her child even when he is wrong. But a woman, a person, must protect herself too. Where was the line between love and self-betrayal? I thought of Robert again. How he used to say engines don't run without oil. Margaret, you can't give what you don't have. He meant cars. But I wondered if he had meant more. Could I keep pouring love into Daniel if the tank inside me was already empty? I pulled out a sheet of stationery I had saved years ago, cream-colored with a faint border of roses. My hand trembled as I began to write. Dear Daniel, you were once the boy who carried rocks in your pockets and told me they were treasures. You were once the boy who sat on my lap and promised to buy me a castle one day. I believed you. I believed every word because that's what mothers do. We believe. Even when the truth is harder, even when the cost is high. But Daniel, your image of generosity has come at my expense. I live with mildew in the carpet while the world claps for a mansion that does not exist. You say it is harmless, but it is not. It takes pieces of me each time you repeat it. It hollows me out. And what's left is not a mother who feels proud, but a woman who feels erased. I do not know if I can forgive you. I do not know if I can expose you. Both choices feel like losing. What I do know is this. My silence will not mean permission any longer. My silence will be memory. My silence will be record. I stopped there, my eyes blurring with tears I did not let fall. I folded the letter once, slid it into an envelope and tucked it into the back of my notebook. Not to send, just to keep, a mirror of my heart and words, private and unsent. I blew out a slow breath and pressed my palm flat on the cover of the notebook. The conflict did not vanish, but the act of writing steadied me. The decision did not need to come tonight. The truth had time, as Patricia said. Time and patience. I returned to bed, the pipes humming like a lullaby I had never asked for. Sleep finally found me, not as comfort but as a truce. For now that was enough. They came on a Sunday afternoon. No warning, no call ahead, just a hard knock at the basement door that rattled the thin frame. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened it to see Daniel and Victoria standing there, dressed too finely for my neighborhood. He in a pressed blazer, she in a cream coat and sharp heels that did not belong on Pine Street. Mom, we need to talk, Daniel said, his jaw tight. I stepped aside, motioning them in. The room shrank around their presence. Victoria's perfume clashed with the smell of boiled tea leaves, and the faint mildew in the carpet. She scanned the space quickly. My small bed, the crooked lamp, the shoebox of bills under the chair. Her lips curled almost imperceptibly, as if the sight itself offended her. We sat at the table. I set the kettle on the stove, letting it warm while they shifted uncomfortably in the cramped chairs. Victoria spoke first, her voice clipped. Margaret, you have to understand how damaging this has been. What you said at the dinner the other week, it's gone around. People are talking. You've made Daniel look irresponsible. And frankly, you've embarrassed the family. I poured hot water into the teapot, letting the steam rise between us. I did not answer. She leaned closer, her tone sharpening. This isn't just gossip. His partners are nervous. They wonder why a man who claims to provide for his mother is being contradicted by his own mother. Do you know what that does to credibility? The kettle hissed softly, the sound filling the silence. I set 3 cups on the table, poured tea carefully and pushed one toward her. My eyes never left the rising steam. So I said nothing. Victoria's hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her coat. Margaret, you don't have to like the way things are presented, but you could at least stay quiet. Do you realize what's at stake here? You're undoing everything we've built. I placed the second cup in front of Daniel, then sat down with my own. The table was small, our elbows nearly touched. I took a slow sip, the warmth steadying me. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low but firm. Mom, Victoria's right. This has gone too far. You need to stop telling people you live here. Complicates things. We're creating a bigger picture, a story that benefits everyone. Why can't you just let it be? I set my cup down gently. The ceramic touched the table with a soft clink. I looked at the liquid for a moment, then raised my eyes to theirs. I still pay $700, I said quietly. For this basement room. The words hung in the air, sharper than any shout could have been. Silence spread out from them like ripples in water, reaching every corner of the room. Victoria blinked first. Her face stiffened, the confident mask slipping. She looked at Daniel, searching for a rebuttal he didn't have. His jaw tightened, his knuckles whitening around the cup he hadn't touched. I didn't add another word. I didn't need to. The truth sat between us on the table, heavier than the teapot, hotter than the steam. Seconds passed like minutes. Victoria shifted in her seat, clearing her throat, but no sound followed. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence cut deeper than anything I could have shouted. Finally, Victoria pushed her chair back abruptly. This is ridiculous," she muttered, her voice thinner than before. She stood, smoothing her coat with shaking hands. "We came here to reason with you. If you refuse to cooperate, then you'll just have to face the consequences of your stubbornness." I lifted my cup again, sipping calmly. My eyes stayed on hers. No anger, no plea, just steadiness. Daniel rose as well, but slower. He looked at me with something between frustration and fear, but he didn't speak. He followed Victoria to the door. When it closed behind them, the room seemed larger, the air lighter. I sat still, letting the quiet return. The tea had cooled, but I finished it anyway. The echo of my words lingered in the air. "I still pay $700 for this basement room." A sentence like a blade, one that cut the performance open, leaving only the truth. When the door closed behind Daniel and Victoria, the silence did not comfort me. It pressed down heavy, heavier than the damp air of the basement. I sat at the table, hands resting on the chipped cup, my body stiff, my heart racing for a long time. I did not move. Then the tears came, not loud, not shaking, just steady streams down my face. I did not cover them, did not rush to wipe them away. They belonged to me. They had waited a long time for permission. The room blurred. I saw the kettle on the stove, still faintly steaming from the tea I had poured. My hand reached toward it, fingertips brushing the warm metal. I let my palm rest there. The thin thread of heat seeped into my skin, grounding me. The steam rose in a soft line, fragile but insistent. It wavered, but it did not vanish. That was when I understood. Silence had carried me this far, but silence alone would not finish the journey. Silence had preserved the truth, but it could not deliver justice. I had written, recorded, collected, but now those pages needed to leave this room. They needed to stand where my voice could not. I thought of Robert again. The way he used to say, "Engines, Margaret. You have to lift the hood. Put your hands in the grease." He had never believed in waiting for someone else to do the work. He would not have wanted me to stay quiet while our son used my name to build a lie. I rose from the chair, wiped my face with the back of my sleeve, and opened the drawer. Inside lay the folder Martin had helped me organize. Rent clipped together, utility bills in neat order, bank statements printed on cheap paper. Beside them, my notebook, page after page filled with Daniel's words, Victoria's smiles, my own reflections. Evidence of a life lived in truth, erased in public but undeniable here. I placed everything on the table. My tears had dried by then. My breath steadied. For the first time in weeks I felt taller, even in that low-ceilinged room. I whispered to the kettle as if to a companion. "It's time." The next morning I called Patricia. My voice was calm when I said, "I think I'm ready to bring you everything." She asked me to come by her office that afternoon. Before I left, I sat once more at the table with the folder in front of me. I added one more page to the notebook. Decision made. Silence is not enough. The papers must speak. I slid the notebook into the folder, tied the string around it, and tucked it under my arm. Then I looked around the basement room. The bed, the crooked lamp, the shoebox still half full of envelopes. This was where the lie had lived. But it would not end here. As I stepped out into the daylight, the air felt sharper, cleaner. My feet were light on the pavement, even though the folder weighed heavy against my ribs. For the first time I was not just carrying my life. I was carrying the proof of it. Patricia's office was on the second floor of an old brick building near the courthouse. The stairwell smelled faintly of dust and floor polish, the kind of smell that clings to places where paperwork has lived for decades. I climbed slowly, the folder heavy in my arms, my hand brushing the worn banister for balance. Patricia greeted me at the door, her expression calm, not rushed. She led me into a room lined with books and filing cabinets. A long wooden table sat in the middle, and she gestured for me to place my folder there. "Are you ready, Margaret?" she asked. I nodded, though my stomach tightened. "As ready as I'll ever be." We sat side by side. I untied the string around the folder and opened it wide. Inside lay the rent slips, each stamped and dated, utility bills lined in neat rows, bank statements marked with yellow tabs, and my notebook filled with ink that had dried slowly under lamplight in the basement. Patricia laid her hands on the papers as if studying them, then began arranging everything into categories. "These will form the backbone," she explained, tapping the rent receipts. "Clear, continuous proof of where you live and what you pay. These," she moved to the utility bills, "show your direct responsibility for household expenses. And these bank statements prove no funds were ever deposited from Daniel or any trust he claims to have set up." I watched her sort, my heart beating harder with each pile. I had lived those slips one by one. Now they stood together, a chorus instead of a whisper. Patricia then slid forward a set of typed letters. "These are preservation requests," she said. "They instruct Daniel's company and any financial institution involved not to destroy records. Once filed, they are legally bound. You will sign them today." She placed the first letter in front of me. My name already appeared at the top. My hand trembled as I took the pen. For a moment I hesitated, staring at the line, waiting for my signature. My life until now had been marked by invisible labor. Meals cooked, floors scrubbed, bills paid quietly. Rarely had my hand written anything that held power. Patricia's voice steadied me. "This is your truth, Margaret. Written, aligned, undeniable." I pressed the pen down. The ink flowed across the page, my signature a little shaky but firm enough to hold. I signed the second letter, then the third. Each stroke felt like laying a brick, building a wall Daniel could not push over with charm or applause. When I finished, Patricia gathered the signed letters, stacked them neatly, and clipped them together. "We'll deliver these to the district attorney's office today. Once they're stamped and logged, the process begins. You won't have to fight this alone anymore." I leaned back, exhaling a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My shoulders loosened. For the first time in years I felt something like relief creep in. Not complete, but enough to soften the edges of fear. Patricia glanced at me. "You did well. Many people never take this step. They let silence swallow them. You refused." I thought of Daniel, his voice on the phone telling me not to get lost in details. I thought of Victoria's sharp smile, daring me to stay quiet. And then I thought of Robert, grease on his hands, telling me that engines don't fix themselves. "I didn't refuse," I said slowly. "I just waited. And now I'm done waiting." Patricia gave a small smile. "Good. Justice moves slower than lies, but it moves." That afternoon we walked together to the courthouse. The air outside was crisp, the sky pale winter blue. My folder, lighter now, rested under Patricia's arm. Inside the courthouse, the floors echoed under our steps. We climbed another set of stairs and entered the clerk's office. Patricia handed over the letters, speaking with the ease of someone who had done this many times. The clerk stamped each one with a heavy thud, the sound of ink meeting paper into permanence. I stood by, hands clasped, watching as the papers that had lived in my basement became official records. Before we left, the clerk slid the stack back toward me. "Sign here," she said, pointing to the ledger. I lifted the pen again. My hand trembled, but I pressed hard, writing Margaret Ellison in firm letters. The ink bled slightly, but it was mine. As we walked back down the courthouse steps, the cold air rushed into my lungs like a cleansing tide. Patricia touched my arm lightly. "Whatever comes next, Margaret, you've already reclaimed your voice." I nodded, clutching my coat tighter. My voice had not been loud. It had been written in slips, bills, and quiet signatures, but it was mine and it was steady. The invitation came from one of Daniel's associates. A charity dinner at a downtown hall, smaller than the Christmas gala but still lined with tables dressed in white linen and glasses polished to a shine. I almost declined, but Patricia advised me to go. "You don't have to perform," she said. "Just be present. Sometimes truth speaks best when it is simply seen." So I went. I wore the same navy dress I had bought years ago for Robert's funeral, pressed carefully and mended at the hem. The lights inside the hall glowed golden, the kind that tried to make everyone look richer than they were. Daniel worked the room as usual, Victoria on his arm, their laughter trailing like perfume. I sat at the far end of a long table, close enough to watch but not to join. People greeted me politely, some curious, some cautious. They all knew the whispers by now. Halfway through the evening, during a lull between courses, a man across the table turned to me. His voice was clear, just loud enough for others nearby to hear. "Mrs. Ellison," he said. "I've always admired the house Daniel bought you. 2 million, wasn't it? Where is it exactly? North Dallas? Highland Park?" Every fork stilled. Conversations hushed. I felt the room tilt toward me, waiting. Victoria's face froze into that practiced smile, but I saw the pulse jump at her throat. Daniel stiffened, his hand tightening around his wine glass. I lifted my cup of water and took a sip. My voice was even when I answered. "Basement. Pine Street. 700 a month." The silence was immediate, heavy. Chairs creaked, but no one spoke. A cough sounded from the far corner, quickly swallowed. I placed my cup down, aligning it neatly with the napkin. My eyes stayed calm, not on Daniel, not on Victoria, but on the man who had asked. His expression faltered, confusion shifting into understanding. Then he looked at Daniel. Victoria's smile cracked, her lips trembling at the edges. She adjusted her earring with shaking fingers, but it was too late. Everyone saw. Daniel tried to laugh, a brittle sound that rang false. "Mom's just joking," he said. "She likes to downplay things." But no one laughed with him. Their silence spoke louder than my words. Heads turned, glances exchanged. Trust evaporated in that pause, faster than applause ever rose. I didn't add anything. I didn't need to. My sentence was enough. A knife wrapped in calm. "Basement. 700 a month." Still Daniel tried again, voice strained. "There are structures, arrangements. She doesn't always see the full picture." But his words collapsed under their own weight. You could see it in the eyes around the table. Nobody believed him anymore. I folded my hands in my lap and let the quiet swell. Victoria shifted beside him, her hands slipping from his arm. For the first time I saw fear, not of me but of the truth she could no longer control. The dinner moved on, but nothing tasted the same. The hum of conversation never fully returned. People avoided Daniel's gaze. Some looked at me instead, not with pity but with a kind of respect. I had not raised my voice. I had not accused. I had only spoken the plain truth, and it had landed heavier than any accusation could. When the evening ended, I left without waiting for dessert. Outside, the night air was crisp, the city lights sharp against the sky. I walked slowly to the bus stop, the sound of my own footsteps steady on the pavement. Behind me, the hall still glowed, but I knew the shine had dimmed for Daniel and Victoria. Inside that room, their story had cracked beyond repair, and all it had taken was one sentence, spoken calmly under chandeliers that no longer dazzled me. The first article appeared in the Dallas Morning News on a Tuesday morning. I saw it at the library spread across the front page of a folded paper left on the reading table. Local entrepreneur faces scrutiny over elder support claims. My name was there in the second paragraph, plain as ink, no longer a whisper but public record. I read the words slowly, letting them settle. By the end of the week, other outlets picked it up. Some called it a scandal, others a breach of trust. The photograph showed Daniel in his polished suits, Victoria at his side, their eyes caught mid-flash as if startled. Each article repeated the same truth. The story of the mansion unraveled under evidence, and questions now mounted about where the money had gone. At night, my phone buzzed with messages from numbers I didn't know. Some reporters, some strangers, some women who whispered their own stories into voicemails. I didn't answer most of them. Patricia handled what mattered. She assured me the investigation would move forward, steady and deliberate. Daniel did not call again. Victoria sent one message, short and brittle. "You've ruined everything." I didn't reply. Her silence after that told me more than words could. Meanwhile, something shifted in my own life. Martin stopped by one evening with pamphlets from a housing program. Subsidized apartments for seniors. Small but safe, filled with light. "You should apply," he said. "You've carried this weight long enough." Patricia agreed. "You deserve a place that reflects your truth, Margaret. Not a basement that hides it." I filled out the forms with careful handwriting, attaching copies of my receipts, bank statements, and proof of income. Weeks later, a letter arrived with the city seal at the top. Proved. A unit had opened in a renovated complex 2 bus lines away from the library. On moving day, Martin carried the heavier boxes, though there weren't many. Clothes, books, the shoebox of old bills, my notebook, and wrapped in towels, the kettle, the one object that had followed me through every chapter. When we arrived, the new apartment startled me with its brightness. Sunlight streamed through a wide window onto a small but clean kitchen. The counters were unchipped. The air smelled fresh. The ceiling did not press down on me. For a moment I stood still, my throat tight, letting the light wash over me. I placed the kettle carefully on the shelf above the stove. Its chipped enamel caught the sunlight, and for the first time in years, it did not look tired. It looked dignified, almost proud. That evening I boiled water and made tea. The steam curled upward into the light, and I thought of all the nights I had stared at it in the dim basement, whispering my truth into silence. Now it rose into open air, unhidden. I sat at the small kitchen table, notebook open in front of me. I wrote the date at the top of a fresh page. Moved today. New place. Window faces east. Rent affordable. Dignity intact. Outside, children played in the courtyard, their laughter carrying upward. It reminded me of Daniel long ago, before ambition hardened his voice. The sound no longer cut me. It soothed. The papers said Daniel was under investigation, that documents were being reviewed, that financial trails were being traced. Victoria had retreated from public events, her name mentioned only in passing. Whatever happened next, it would unfold in its own time. I did not need to watch every headline. I only needed to live. I touched the kettle's handle, warm from its recent work, and whispered, "We made it." The sun dipped lower, casting the room in a golden glow. For the first time in years I felt not hidden, not erased, but seen, even if only by myself, and that was enough. The new apartment had a window wide enough to sit beside. Some evenings I drew the curtains back and let the fading sun spill across the floor. That night was one of those evenings. I set the kettle on the stove, then carried my notebook to the window and opened it on my lap. The page waited blank and steady. I picked up my pen and wrote slowly, letting the words arrive without force. Forgiveness is not performance. Forgiveness is a boundary. I sat with the sentence for a long while. For years, Margaret Ellison believed forgiveness meant keeping quiet, forcing a smile, and carrying the weight of insults and half-truths without protest. She thought it meant swallowing her hurt and pretending not to notice when things, dignity, trust, even love, were taken from her. But time had taught her otherwise. Forgiveness, if it ever arrived, would not erase the wounds of the past. It would mean drawing a line no one would ever be allowed to cross again. On the table behind her rested a letter she had written to her son Daniel weeks earlier, a letter she never had the courage to send. The envelope was still sealed, the paper soft and worn at the edges from being moved from place to place. She picked it up, turned it in her hands, then set it back down. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. Some words are not meant to travel. They are meant to stay where they were born, reminders of the person who wrote them and survived. From the kitchen came the sound of the kettle, a low hum that soon gave way to the rising curl of steam, white against the fading light. Margaret rose slowly, poured the hot water, and carried the cup back to the window. The warmth seeped through the porcelain into her palms. She breathed in the simple scent of tea leaves and let herself sit in the moment, thinking of all that had shifted in her life and all that had remained unchanged. If someone asked her now what lesson she carried forward, she knew the answer. If one day you find yourself forced to wear a mask that does not belong to you, whether by family, by circumstance, or by the sharp expectations of others, you do not have to keep it on. Paper and patience, she realized, can speak louder than applause. Outside, the street had grown quiet. Lamps flickered on one by one, painting soft pools of light along the pavement. She let the hush settle into her bones. From the kitchen, the kettle still whispered on the stove, the same gentle echo it had carried every night before. But tonight the sound lived in a space where sunlight reached. The circle had closed. Margaret sat inside it at peace. Before we part ways, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee in your hands, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read each one with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to join a community that still believes in kindness, in healing, and in second chances. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next.